gonna do you guys a huge favor right now and skip the lame S22 Ultra equals S23 Ultra jokes altogether. Rather, what I'm gonna tell you is that the S23 Ultra is one of the best decisions Samsung's made in recent times. Now hear me out. Yes, the phone might be very identical to its predecessor, but I really like the approach Samsung took here. As opposed to just throwing random stuff on the wall and redesigning a already great phone, they chose to refine it to near perfection, and the results definitely show. While the number of changes are only a handful, I really do think they bring this phone one step closer to being arguably the best phone in 2023. So let's have a quick look as to what this guy right here has to offer, and well, you be the judge. Granted, design-wise, things haven't changed a whole bunch, but there are still subtle changes you may notice. For example, you have slightly more boxier edges on the phone, which basically means you in theory have better grip, though I find that to be kind of subjective. What I love is the rear or bottom side of the phone actually, where you have a flush design. If I did not know any better, I would think that the stylus is essentially a design element of the phone rather than its own individual piece of hardware. You still have that same static 6.8-inch curved AMOLED display over here with a Quad HD Plus resolution, 1750 nits of peak brightness with HDR10 Plus certification. However, there is one minor change. This year we have the Gorilla Glass Victus 2 as opposed to the Victus Plus with the previous generation. As to how much more durable it is, well, I don't have the financial liberty nor the willpower to scratch my phone, so I'll leave that to Jerry Rigs Everything. Aside from the curved display, the rest of the body has a aluminum frame. The sides look absolutely gorgeous with those well-polished buttons as well as those color-matched antennas to give it a subtle but classy look. The rear side of this phone remains its most physically attractive feature. So I love the way Samsung lays out the lenses in that straight linear vertical position. It just looks clean and I'm a big fan of it, and I'm really not a fan of the way Apple does their whole triangular lens thing. This is a far more organized way. I also love the uniform aluminum frame design. Nothing flashy, it's clean, it's simple, and it really does show how far the S23 Ultra has matured when compared to some of the older phones that we've seen in the past. Now, I will say this thing is an absolute fingerprint magnet from both the front side and the back side, which really does suck the life out of design sometimes if you're trying to rock this phone bare naked. But here we are. There are essentially two big changes in the S23 Ultra. The first of them is the upgraded Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 processor. And the reason I think they stuck with Gen 2 is because it's still on the 4nm process. However, if you look at Geekbench numbers, there definitely have been notable improvements in both the single core and multi-core departments. But look, I'm going to be honest, I could bore you with all the details about how this phone is improved on numbers and benchmarks, but the fact is we're at a point now with smartphone performance where it's like 99% speed of light versus 98% speed of light. Visually, you can no longer tell the difference. That basically means that everyday tasks you perform on your smartphone, like web browsing, playing games, watching media content, just aren't going to feel any flashier or smoother than they already do compared to, let's say, the S22 Ultra or even the S21 for that matter. It's just already that good, though arguably they may have impacts on the long-term use of this phone. Now, what is a more notable feat, however, is the fact that battery life has dramatically improved on this phone thanks to the efficiency of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor. So for example, despite having the same 5000 milliamp hour battery, we now can easily get up to 14 hours on a single charge based on real-world tests that I conducted personally, and to me that's definitely all-day battery life and then some. This thing is definitely impressive, and it just shows you how Samsung and, well, Qualcomm in general has really caught up to the same efficiency standards that we see with Apple. It really is a sight to behold. The second big improvement is cameras. Now, I feel like this is something we say every year with practically every new smartphone. However, it's worth noting there are some technical noteworthy achievements here. So on paper, we still have a total of 4 cameras on the rear side. So you have one 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, you have the primary wide lens, which is now a monstrous 200 megapixels, you have 2 telephoto lens, one of which has 3 times optical zoom at 10 megapixels and the other one up to 10 times optical zoom, again at 10 megapixels, and you still of course have the 100 times digital zoom, But instead of taking moonshots, I took a zoomed in photo of that Bell building, and you can see there's a total lack of maintenance on that logo. Bell needs to pick up their game. How else would I have known this if I didn't have that handy dandy 100x zoom? But that aside though, it's worth noting that all the lenses with the exception of the ultra-wide lens have built-in optical image stabilization, and that has been improved as well. Now the wide lens basically has 200 megapixels. That's a lot of detail. However, in default, the wide lens camera captures in the standard 12 megapixel format. However, you can change that to 50 or 200, though it is worth noting the higher you go on that count, the longer the shutter lag becomes, though that's a reasonable compromise in my opinion. Video quality was already great with the S22 Ultra, though I find there are two things that are slightly better. Firstly, I find that the optical image stabilization has further improved and the footage seems even more stable than it did with previous generations. This is great for those shots where you have a lot of hand movement. And it's also worth noting, of course, you can now record up to 8K 30 frames per second versus just 24 frames per second in the previous generation. This is mostly just a flex by Samsung and Qualcomm in my honest opinion. Most of us aren't going to touch that 8K setting as it's just not healthy for the storage of your phone. But of course, it's still a noteworthy accomplishment for a device like this. One thing that really saddens me is that even after all these years of refinement and having such a powerful processor, Samsung still cannot produce a perfectly smooth video feedback loop when it comes to their camera app. It still feels choppy, laggy, and clunky, especially when compared to the iPhone 14 Pro's interface over here. And it's kind of shameful again because this is supposed to be the best Samsung has to offer, and just having a choppy UI with the video feedback isn't a great thing. This year's selfie camera has actually taken a cut in the megapixel department at just 12 megapixels. However, despite this, the actual quality of the front-facing camera has slightly improved. It's more crisp in overall detail, and it has a slightly more warmer tone. On top of that, it can still dish out 40K 60 frames per second, which is pretty impressive for a selfie camera. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the S Pen is still included as standard equipment with the S23 Ultra, and while I've never really bought a Samsung phone ever for the intention of using its stylus, and I think that goes for a lot of Samsung's consumer, it's nice to have such a nifty and responsive tool, though it remains more or less the same as the previous generation. Of course, you still have the IP68 resistant rating on this phone, and you still have the latest Wi-Fi 6E standard, though it is worth noting Bluetooth has been upgraded from 5.2 to 5.3 on this generation. And of course, there's probably going to be a number of other very micro features that have improved year over year, but none of them are noteworthy enough to particularly include in this video. Now, some of you might have been expecting a more detailed comparison or review of the camera system. I am still collecting information and doing more tests to see just how good this phone's camera is, and will most definitely produce a video a little bit later on, so stay tuned for that. So I'm going to mention just two more things. Firstly, the S23 Ultra defaultly ships out with Android 13, and I like that because Android 13 actually also has a greater focus on stability and refinement as opposed to revolutionary features, which complements this phone nicely. Now, the second thing worth noting is that Samsung has doubled the storage with the base configuration at 256 GB, though they still have the dirty tactic of limiting this base model with just 8 GB of RAM versus 12 GB with the higher end configurations. I think it's a pretty sad practice given that this is the top of the line phone Samsung offers. It just looks petty in my opinion. Charge 20, 30, 40 bucks more, but at least give the full 12 GB of RAM. Seriously, Samsung. Now, other than that though, I still think this is a fantastic phone, and Samsung really has, refined it to near perfection in my opinion. Let me know what you think of this phone, if you think Samsung's done enough with it, if the design should have been changed in your opinion, or if there should have been more features in general. And as always, if you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing to this channel, liking this video. It makes my day, and also it keeps the bread and butter coming in. Catch you in the next one.